take those risks in your life which can help you challenge yourself, which can help you explore your own potential. That is very important for us to do. And it goes back to how do you reinvent yourself? How do you actually say that I can do a lot more things in life than just whatever I'm doing currently? And you will not know it till you actually go and venture and out and do it.
Welcome to another episode of the People Hum interview series. I'm your host Vanessa Rose. So let's begin with a quick introduction of People Hum. People Hum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM, that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the People Hum blog and the video channel, which receives upwards of 200,000 visitors a year, and publish around 2 interviews with well-known names globally every month. And now for our guest, Harsh Kumar Johari is an executive and leadership coach and training consultant. He is an ICF ACC coach, certified intelligent leadership coach, and certified happiness coach. He is also a very well-known TEDx speaker. His clients include seniors like CXOs, national heads, SVPs from industries such as finance, shipping, consulting, and technology. We are extremely happy and honored to have him on our interview series today. Welcome, Harsh. We're thrilled to have you.
Oh, it's a great honor and privilege to be part of your platform. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's our pleasure too. So the first question I have for you, Harsh, is you've had 25 years of experience in the field. So could you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Sure. So I started my career in merchant navy, merchant marine, and this was way back in 1991 when everybody was trying to become a doctor or an engineer. I actually chose to join merchant navy, uh, and I joined the shipping industry as a cadet. And for the next close to 18 years, I was in the shipping industry. I was sailing on ships all over the world. I eventually became a captain and took command, and then sailed a few years as captain. So that was my first career, which was related to shipping and sailing. And then in 2009, I took a break actually. I went back to college. I did my MBA education. And then I moved over from shipping to finance. I got an offer with Goldman Sachs, the investment bank. And I joined their team here in Bangalore, in India. So I moved from shipping to finance with almost no knowledge of finance. And for close to 9 years, I was working with Goldman Sachs, and again I worked in different roles. Eventually, I was managing their India payment and treasury operations team, which was a hardcore finance role. And then mid of last year, I again took a break. I quit my job and I started my own people practice. So now I work as an executive and leadership coach. So three distinct and diverse careers: shipping, finance, and coaching, not necessarily related to each other. But I am a strong believer that we all should reinvent our lives at regular intervals, and that's what I've tried to do in my life.
It sounds like a really interesting journey. So how do you call yourself a happiness coach? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so happiness again means different things to different people, right? So when I started my coaching practice, I realized that coaching is one aspect of it, but there are a lot of organizations who are struggling with the culture part of it, in terms of how do they motivate employees, how do they engage employees, how do they make sure the culture environment is actually conducive for the employees to perform well, and that's where the happiness coaching comes a part of it. It's very much related to workplace happiness and the softer aspects of an organization, right? There's a whole sort of the hard aspect, which is the infrastructure and physical facilities, amenities you provide, but the softer aspect of leadership, culture, values, behaviors, and that is really what drives employees in terms of high productivity. So happiness coaching is all about working with leaders in organizations and trying to understand what is working well in their culture and what is not working well in their culture, and then trying to recommend steps or remediation measures so that organizations can take those measures and ensure a higher degree of employee engagement.
If you're working remotely, how do you think leaders can do to ensure that their team is fully engaged and productive while working from home?
So working from home, actually now, of course, it's been a couple of months since we've been in this. So there's a lot of things people have tried out. People have seen what is working, what is not working. But generally what I have seen, especially when I'm talking to my clients who are senior leaders, There are certain things which are coming out common across in terms of, you can say, best practices. No? I think the first thing really is you as a leader being accessible and available to your teams, right? Because now there is this physical meetings are not happening. So there is obviously this need to connect at a human level, and the physical meeting not happening also creates some level of mistrust. Who's where and who's not there. So I think as a leader, you need to be accessible and available to your team when they need you. Right? That's one thing, right? The other thing is lot of leaders are trying to focus a lot on productivity, but there's a big difference between being busy and being productive. So it's very important for us to measure, saying, okay, in these times, how will we measure, or what is the definition of productivity for us? Does it mean that an employee has to sit 8 hours in front of a computer? No, no. So then productivity has to be tied back to some very specific goals, which you want to achieve in the day or in the week, whatever that is, right? So don't expect your employees to be all the time in front of a system, because that will not work, right? Because employees are working at home, they have their own domestic demands, right? So when I'm working from home, somebody could ring a bell and I might have to open the door for the person, right? Or I might have domestic chores to attend to. So, so don't expect people will be in front of a computer all the time, and don't try to micromanage, right? Because that's the whole lack of trust, where managers are feeling, is my employee actually working at this point or not? And it's okay. It's okay if employee is not immediately at that point available, because he or she may be doing something which is a domestic need or demand, right? So one is defining productivity in terms of very specific goals, what you want from the employee, making sure those goals are very clear to them through the the early morning check-in calls you have, or the previous day evening wind-up calls you have. So have those regular calls where you are very clear about, okay, this is what we want to achieve today. It could be saying, okay, this client presentation has to be completed by end of day, or these emails have to go out, whatever that is. Be very clear about that productivity measure. I would also say make sure you are respecting people's time. As I said, a lot of domestic demands are there, especially when you're working with global teams. People are working in different time zones. I'm hearing a lot of stories where employees are complaining that my manager is saying to work more or late because now you are saving on commuting time. And I think that is not fair. Right? That's not fair. So respect people's time, respect people's personal lives. And that is where I think you also as a manager need to know, okay, individually people saying, okay, what is your life looking like at home? What is going to be your domestic needs for today? Okay, and you cannot have a cookie cutter approach for everybody. I think that is something to be aware of. Individual needs of people in those times is important. I think those are some of the things people. The other thing I would say is also maintain a level of sort of social as well as work balance, right? Not it should not all the time be work, because again we are hearing a lot of things around. The boundary between weekdays and weekends are blurred, and I'm working continuously. So have those regular breaks in between and provide that informal environment through various means. Because that's a key part of human engagement. That's what we do in office, right? When we're working, we take breaks, we take coffee break, we go for lunch and all. So try to see how those sort of breaks or informal sort of gatherings can be arranged at regular intervals, so that people feel it's not all about work. I think those are things if people do, and of course, making sure that people have the right tools and technologies in place and trained for that. A lot of employees are, using some of these tools for the first time, and they're struggling. And then organizations also adopting some of these tools and technologies for the first time at such a large scale. So that is also important to make sure you're providing them the right tools and techniques and training if required to make sure they are leveraging it to the best. Right?
Very true. Yeah, remote working has changed the way we look at productivity and work life for everyone.
And see, one thing we have to realize is that our lives and homes were never designed for long-term work from home. Working on a week, on a Friday or one day of a week, that was okay. But now when it is extended, neither our homes are designed in terms of having a dedicated space or the right bandwidth or connection. Right? That is not meant to is a person's lives. With everybody around, it was never meant to be that. Right? So.
Also, the benefits of diversity are well known. So how does an organization go about building diversity while keeping the best individual for the role perspective?
Interesting question. So I think key thing is to realize the difference between diversity and inclusion. I think that's the first step. I would say diversity, inclusion, and maybe belongingness or sense of belonging. These are terms interchangeably used, but I feel there is a difference. Diversity could mean, different things for different organizations, but in simple terms, you are actually making sure that you have employees for different diverse backgrounds, whether it is religion, whether it is profession, whether it is gender, whether it is preferences, whatever that is. You are making sure that you have a culture or environment where you are providing equal opportunity to people from different backgrounds based on how you define diversity. That's one part of it, right? Now, once these people are part of your organizations, are you also giving them a platform to have a say on things? That is inclusion. Right. So, for example, I have invited people from different backgrounds and cultures in organizations, but now I need to make sure that they are getting the right opportunity to give opinions, to have a say in matter. That is about inclusion, really. Right? And then I may be giving you all the opportunity to talk, but I may not listen to you. I may ignore your opinion. So that is the real sense of belongingness, where I am actually, I'm bringing diverse talent. I'm making sure they have the platform to sort of voice out their opinions, give their thoughts and ideas, and I'm listening to them. I'm having a culture which is embracing these difference in opinions, these different of thoughts and ideas, and I'm accepting everything without judging, without any bias. So I think that's the first step to understand these are the different things. The second thing diversity is, I would say there are, I call it two I's: intent and investment. So diversity is all about intent. If you just think about diversity as a tick box, just because everybody else is doing, you will never really achieve diversity. So it has to be very, very intentional. That I believe in diversity. I believe diversity is important for my business. I believe diversity is important for my growth as an organization, and hence I'm really wanting to embrace diversity. So my intent is very, very clear. It is not because everybody is doing, hence I'm looking at diversity. That's one thing. So I'm very intentional about it, right? Two is I'm ready to invest in it, right? I can be a lot intentional about it, but if my behaviors or actions do not match up to what I want to do, then I will never get results. So making sure diversity is as an agenda is backed by the right level of investment. And investment could mean everything. Investment could mean investment of time, resources, money, whatever it is. That's important. And then intent and investment should be backed by, I would say, governance and accountability. So when I'm having the diversity agenda, I'm ready to invest. What sort of governance I have in place to ensure that whatever I'm saying I will do, I'm actually doing it. Who's providing that process of checks and balances, and who's accountable for it? And that's why I think it goes back to the top leadership, right? You have to, as the at the senior most level, you have to believe in diversity. You have to be intentional about it. You have to role model it. So it cannot be that it's only you're saying it, but you're not actually doing anything about it. So at that senior most level, leaders have to display the right set of behaviors, actions, values, which show that this is what it means. So it's other thing. It's also called role modeling, right? If you are role modeling the right behaviors, is where your teams will also see that yes, this is a leader who is truly believing in it, and his or her actions are actually backed by it, right? So making sure it comes right from the top as a strong role modeling. And then I think finally making sure managers are accountable for it, whether it's a part of their performance measurement or whatever it is, right? Ultimately, you need to make sure people at different levels are held accountable to promote diversity, right? And the final thing I would say is that sometimes we end up talking too much about diversity and not doing anything about it. So it's a question of making sure that you are just not having those talks. You are not just having those breakfast meetings or lunches and celebrations and then not doing anything about it. It has to be backed by real action, which needs investment. I think that's how I would say.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept of the two eyes. Just having an intent is not enough.
Correct. Yeah.
So, how do you relate your experience as the captain of a ship to corporate leadership?
Uh, so there are very stark differences and there are a lot of commonalities. The stark differences as a captain of a ship, it was a very command and control structure. It's a very hierarchical structure. There's a lot of discipline required. There's a lot of authority there because it is required in that environment, right? Because you're in the middle of the ocean. You're responsible for the safety of your crew. So your real lives are involved. People's lives are involved. You're carrying cargo or the ship, which is an asset worth of millions of dollars. So if you take a wrong decisions, something would happen to the ship or damage the ship or damage the cargo or impact someone's life. So it's a very real life responsibility. So that is why that whole need to have authority discipline is required. So that was one aspect. Whereas when you come on shore, it is a relatively flatter structure. It is not always completely flat, but a much so from a vertical structure you come to a flat structure. So that's a big stark difference, right? As a captain, I was used to giving orders, but when I came on shore, I realized that nobody is listening to my orders because I'm not supposed to give orders. I have to get into this whole consensus building more where you have to listen to it, and that took me a lot of time to get used to that culture, right? Because the very fact that as a captain on a ship, people would call me Captain Sir, because there was a respect for the rank. And here, when I came on shore, even the first year analysts would call me by first name was a cultural shock to me. When I came on shore. So that was just a difference in terms of the environment. But I realized there's a lot of commonality also, right? Certain skills which you learn, for example, how to manage people. It's a very transferable skill. So what you learn on ship is a large part of it is very relevant on shore as well, of course, with different nuances. But people management at a base level will remain the same, right? Same things like how do you manage time management, risk management. So there are certain skills which are quite transferable, I realized. And that is what helped me into that integration. There is certain thing you need to learn new, right? But there were a lot of unique skills we developed on the ship. For example, you're working in a resource constrained environment. The ship is in the middle of the ocean. You don't have anybody to call for help if something goes wrong. You will not get extra supplies or extra manpower in the middle of the ocean. So whatever you have, whatever situation you're facing, you have to make good with it. Whatever crew you have, so some may have experience, some may not have experience, some may be skilled, some may not be skilled. You have to manage with whatever you have. So working in a resource constrained environment was a great skill which I learned on ships, right? As a leader, then a lot of value was on self-discipline. Discipline about not just discipline of the process, but about self-discipline, leading from the front, right? That's another thing. The power of intuition. A lot of times, you have to make real life decisions right at that moment. And any wrong decision could have a major impact. So sometimes you take a lot of this. You will not have enough time actually to process information or gather information. So how do you actually be very intuitive as a leader? I think those are some very unique things we learned on ships. And I think the biggest thing I learned on ship was, there is no job which is big or small. I started my career as a cadet, and my first job was to mop the floors, cleaning the floors. That's why I started my career. But the fact that you had to do everything on your own as a cadet made me realize the importance of hard work, importance of what is known as dignity of labor, right? No job is big or small. If you can do a job, then you can probably manage that job better. When you do a job on your own, you also know how difficult the job is. So when your team members are doing their job, you respect them, you empathize with them. I think those are some great skills we learned on ships, and then there a lot of learning happened when I moved to corporate, right? I learned the value of building a strong network, because on a ship it was never like that. You are operating on a ship, and every time you go on a different ship. But on a corporate, the value of building strong networks, that I had never done in my entire life, right? How do you take charge of your career? I had never done that in my life, because we had a system of progression on in the shipping industry. But here you have to make sure that you take charge of your career, right? How do you listen to people? As I said, I was used to giving orders, but here I had to learn a lot about listening to people and making sure that everyone's voice and opinions are heard. So I think there was a lot of learning which happened when I moved to my corporate job. But I also realized that a large part of my learning on ship was relevant also in this case. So sometimes we underestimate what we learn over time. So it's not always you have to start from zero. So that openness of learning, I think, has to be there whenever you move from one job to another. But I think it was a great transition for me, and I think that's really it.
It's interesting how leadership changes, at different levels and in different industries.
True.
So, where do you think we can start in improving the performance of an average team?
I think before we should think about how do we define average? Are you measuring it against something or not? So that's important, because what you cannot measure, you cannot improve. So how do you define average? That one thing, right? The other thing is, again, when you say my team performance average, it could be because of, I would say, three reasons. It could be lack of skill, it could be lack of experience, or maybe lack of motivation. One of these factors could be there. Now I'm focusing only on the team part of it. And indirectly, all these factors will lead to you as a manager or a leader. So if there is a lack, if let's say it's a question of lack of skill, so have you actually spent time to understand what are the strengths of my team members and what are the areas where they need development? Right? If it is lack of experience, have you as a manager or leader spent time to understand what sort of experience they need, or do they have the right experience for that right role or the job in hand? Right? If it is lack of motivation, have you as a manager spent time to understand what motivates my team members? So it will go back to the same two I's which I said earlier: intent and investment. So is your intent to develop performance because you want to actually develop a people, or it's purely linked to business goals? Right? If it is purely linked to business goals, it will always be process related. But if you genuinely care about your own people and you want to actually help them grow and succeed, then it's a very, very different intent. And then again, if you have that intent, it has to back by investment. Again, going back to investment of time, knowing every individual personally, saying, okay, what are his or her strengths, what are the areas of development, what can I do to support them, requires investment of time. Knowing what motivates them, what does not motivate them, requires time to understand. For example, if you're managing a team of 100 people, until you know each person individually, you cannot have a generic approach in team management. So that intent and investment as a leader is very, very important if you want to improve performance of your team, right? So, and even if you look at things like providing, let's say, clarity of their roles and responsibilities, right? Role modeling as a leader, communication, whatever you said, it all requires intent and investment. So I think if leaders think on those lines, then there is no reason why the performance of their teams cannot improve.
So it all comes down to asking yourself if you're, profit centric or people centric.
Right? Exactly. And then if you realize that, and how it, again, instead of saying they have to improve, what can you do? I think that's the question. A lot of times we say, okay, my team member is not working hard, or they didn't deliver results. But okay, why? It's not that they didn't want to. If you sit back and think, no employee joins an organization for not succeeding, right? They join to succeed, they join to grow, right? And normally people are not shy from hard work, normally, right? So people want to work, they want to deliver results, they want to grow, they want to succeed. Now, if some of these are not happening, you have to understand why it is not happening. Nobody joins an organization saying, I will join, but I will not work and I will not succeed. No, people don't do that, right? So if one of these things are not happening, why? And that understanding why means, again, you have to spend time, you have to invest time. I think that's the key thing. And that's why the rules of human engagement don't change. Whether it is a workplace or professional. If I need to improve a relationship, I have to invest time in that. And I have to take ownership saying, what can I do about it? If I say my employee performance is not good, okay, what can I do to help and support him or her? Rather than saying, you go and figure out on your own. That's the whole thing, right?
Really helpful, Harsh. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, Harsh, do you have any last soundbites you'd like to leave our audience with?
So certain things I strongly believe in, I probably relate to that, right? One is, I believe that all of us are born to do great things in life. We all are born with immense potential, but for a variety of reasons, we don't explore our potential. We get fixed to a certain type of role or job or lifestyle, and we live that forever. So my first advice is that, not just in this environment, but outside this environment, take those risks in your life which can help you challenge yourself, which can help you explore your own potential. That is very important for us to do. And it goes back to how do you reinvent yourself? How do you actually say that I can do a lot more things in life than just whatever I'm doing currently? And you will not know it till you actually go and venture out and do it. So how do you reinvent yourself and how do you explore your potential, right? That's one. The second thing I'll say is, you believe in yourself. I think that's important, right? If you do not believe in yourself, others will not believe in yourself. So having a strong self-belief, yes, I can do things, is important. But having a belief itself will not generate results. So belief has to then sort of convert into actions, into behavior, which can then deliver results. So that's the second thing, having a strong sense of self-belief. A third thing I would say is ask this question every time, every morning, what can I do? So irrespective of whichever situation you are, whether it's a personal situation, professional situation, what can you do about it? Most of the time, we end up sort of questioning others, saying my happiness or my pain is because of somebody else. Now, whether it is at personal level or it is a professional level, but we don't introspect saying what can I do about it. And when you ask that question to yourself every time, there is always something which you will come up saying I can do something about that situation, whether it is workplace or at home. So what can you do? I think that's the question people should ask. Right? I think those are things, three things, right? Having, making sure you really reinvent yourself at regular intervals, not be in your comfort zone, making sure you challenge yourself so that you know what is your true potential, right? And having self-belief, but making sure your belief is backed by actions. And fourth is taking ownership and saying, what can I do about whatever is happening in my life? I think those are four things I would say.
These are some really nice insights, Harsh. Thank you so much for taking time out and sharing your views with us. I had a great time talking to you, and I'm sure our audience is going to love this interview too.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting her. It was a pleasure talking to you, and again, really privilege and honor to be part of this platform.
Thank you so much.